The diencephalon is a portion of the brain that is sort of situated between the brainstem and the cerebrum, and it consists of a couple of different parts. It consists of the thalamus, the epithalamus, the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the basal nuclei. So the thalamus is involved in receiving sensory information. So we're going to say it receives sensory information. And acts as the sort of logistics system or the UPS of the brain. So it's going to receive all of this information, usually sensory information from sensory neurons, and then as well as information from the cerebellum, and then some feedback from the basal nuclei, right? But its job is to essentially take all of this information, sort it out, and then send it to the appropriate cerebral cortex, supposed to send it where it needs to go. Okay. Your epithalamus consists of the pineal gland, and so remember the pineal gland, that's the one that's responsible for secreting melatonin, so it's going to help regulate the circadian rhythm. The epithalamus also consists of something known as the habenular trigone, and this one's often left out at the undergraduate level, but we're just going to include it here to show that the epithalamus is more than just the pineal gland, but it's involved in a variety of different things that typically we will see associated with the limbic system. So your hypothalamus, remember, has a direct connection with the pituitary gland, and it's responsible for regulating thirst and hunger, right, as well as sort of residing over the pituitary gland, which is the master endocrine gland. So remember, it also has neural tissue in it, right? And then your basal nuclei, I'm going to put in parentheses here ganglia, because you'll see this term as well. You'll see them called basal ganglia. And these basal nuclei, I use the term nuclei because ganglia are typically reserved as gray matter or collections of cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system, whereas nuclei is collections of cell bodies in the central nervous system. So these basal nuclei, these are collections of cell bodies deep within the white matter of the cerebrum as part of the basal nuclei. So you'll often see when talking about the diencephalon, somebody might say something like they'll call this the subthalamus, and that is portion of the basal nuclei. And the basal nuclei are incredibly important in regulating voluntary movement. So tracts or nerve fibers will run through the basal nuclei. So they'll come down from the motor cortex of the cerebrum, come through the basal nuclei, and the basal nuclei will sort of modify those signals that come through. Right? And so we'll talk about that a little bit more when we look at the motor loops and the control of muscle movement when we get there. So these are the structures of the diencephalon.